Hi everybody, thanks for coming along. Yeah, so my name's Tom Mitchell. I'm going to hopefully over the next hour introduce you to product management, which is a role I've been in for about 7 or 8 years now. That is increasingly important in the technology space, but not very well understood and not that high profile, at least in the UK, just yet. So, before we get stuck in, I'll give you a little bit of background on me. So, I originally studied physics a long time ago, and did that for 4 years, but while I was doing it, I got a summer job working at a small internet service provider in my hometown of Bournemouth, and that was my first sort of proper introduction to the internet, just as it was beginning to sort of emerge into the public consciousness, and immediately caught on to the fact that this looked like it was going to be interesting and useful, and decided this was the direction I was going to take my career in once I graduated. And so I got a job with a company called Sun Microsystems, who were a big sort of workstation and networking technology provider back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they really rode the sort of dot-com boom of that period. But they also really suffered when it all sort of imploded around 2001, 2002. But they were the company that originally invented Java and a bunch of other important technology. They were a great place to work at that time. And after working for them for 8 years in the UK and then for a while in Silicon Valley, I came back home and joined Google. And I joined Google in 2006 in London. At that time, Google was about 3,500 people. But I was still more on the engineering side. So I was never really a hardcore software developer. I hadn't got the computer science sort of background for that. So I was more doing sort of technical support and helping businesses sort of use Google technology. And after a year or so, I moved to their Sydney office in Australia and started working on maps. And that's where I first sort of was introduced to product management and realized this was something quite interesting and something that was potentially sort of the long-term career that I'd really been scrabbling around trying to find up to that point. So I switched, moved into product management, worked in Google for 9 years in total, including 5 years in Sydney and 3 years in San Francisco. And then moved back to the UK back in 2015, joined Crowdcube, who are an equity crowdfunding startup based here in Exeter, just in the innovation centre at the top of the hill. And I didn't, I had no particular reason for wanting to be in Exeter. I don't have any family connection, but this just seemed like the most interesting opportunity that came along. It seemed like a nice place to live, and I've been enjoying it ever since. In fact, today is my 2-year anniversary to the day of joining Crowdcube. So that's all very well and good, but why am I here? So one of the first things I was asked to do at Crowdcube was build what's called a product team, which is a team of product managers. And I had worked at Google with a wide range of product managers, from very junior entry-level graduates all the way up to sort of director level and above. And what I'd seen was that young people, when brought into this role early and mentored, could be hugely effective as product managers. So I was keen to replicate that at Crowdcube and hire a mixture of both junior and experienced people. And so I posted 2 jobs. This was one of them. This was the job where I was looking for graduate level people. And I struggled enormously to fill this role. And it became clear to me in that process of that hiring exercise, which took about 4 or 5 months, that one of the biggest challenges I had was just a simple lack of awareness of product management amongst students in general, and across the UK, really. And that this concerned me greatly because as the UK technology ecosystem grows, there's going to be more and more need for people coming up into this role, but there's just a severe lack of kind of a pipeline of people in the UK. So I decided that I shouldn't just whine about this, I should do something about it. And I put together an early version of this presentation, and I delivered it here in Exeter as a trial run about a year ago. And since then have delivered it at a variety of different universities around the country and refined it. And so if you had the misfortune of being here a year ago, what you're about to see looks dramatically different from what you saw then. But gradually trying to figure out how to sort of get the message across, and also working with sort of other organisations in the UK to try and kind of reach more people. Okay, so this is the basic structure of the presentation. Just an introduction to what a product manager is. To be fair, that's sort of the bulk of the topic, really. And then a little bit about why it's an interesting role and why it's an exciting career that you might want to consider. And then just some tips on how to get started, what you might want to be doing now if this is something that would be interesting to you in the long term. Okay, so firstly, what is a product manager? So this is really in two parts. Firstly, a bit of an outline, the sort of things we do and our responsibilities. And then I've added something fairly recently in response to feedback I've had when I've given this, which is a case study. So talk you through an actual product that I worked on at Google and what the process was from start to finish, from inception all the way to launch, and what my responsibilities were in doing that. Before we get stuck in, I should caveat this, that when I say product manager, I mean what's sometimes called a digital product manager. So this is a product manager working in the technology sector. And I mention this because product management as a discipline really arose around 20 years ago in the States in technology. But as it's become more established, it's begun to sort of expand out into other industries. But it's a little bit different in every industry, and I can't speak to the experience of being a product manager, say at a manufacturing industry, for example. Okay, so this slide is sort of very obvious, but it's worth saying. Before we talk about what a product manager is, we have to just define what we mean by a product. And so essentially any hardware, software, or technology service that's offered to consumers or businesses. So you think of any company that does anything that falls broadly into that category, be it someone making a game for your phone, to someone doing sort of high-end digital video editing software, or someone doing business, e-commerce or customer relationship management tools for enterprises, or doing a cloud platform technology. All of these organizations would have a product manager assigned to each of the products that they offer in the market. And the role of the product manager, if you're going to sum it up in one simple phrase, is to own the success of the product. In other words, it's the job of the product manager to figure out what the right product is and how you bring it to market and then make it a success. In other words, get people to adopt it and ensure it generates the value that's intended of it for the business. Most of the time that value is revenue, but not always. So that's very snappy, but what does it actually mean in reality? So the analogy I like to give for a product manager is they're somewhat of a conductor, like the conductor of an orchestra, because I am, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a software developer. I don't build the products I manage. And similarly, the conductor of an orchestra doesn't play any instruments. They do decide what music will be played, and then they coordinate all of the musicians to make sure they deliver a good experience for the audience. And that's basically what we do as product managers. We coordinate all the different functions that are involved in making a product and getting it launched, and then make sure we're building the best possible thing for the user base. And the interesting thing about being a product manager, and something that's quite unique to the role within companies, is that it's one of the few functions that has a perspective over the entire life cycle of a product, from the moment in which someone thinks of it to the day in which it's killed off, basically. Many of the roles that interact with products along that journey, they see only parts of the puzzle. They may see the development stage, or they may see the launch stage because they're, say, marketing it, but they don't see the end-to-end life cycle. So, and the role of a product manager changes as the product moves through that process. So, you start with an idea, and it's a common misconception that it's the job of the product manager to come up with ideas, and that's actually not the case. The product manager is equally at liberty to suggest ideas as anybody else in the business, or customers, or partners. But ideas can come from anywhere. And the job of the product manager really is to listen to all those suggestions and ideas and feedback, look for patterns, look for things that keep coming up, look for opportunities, so problems that are not being addressed by competing offerings, or new revenue streams that you could capture. And synthesize that all down together into a proposition, an idea for what the product could be, and then build a business case around that to justify the expense and the risk of going ahead and building this product. And to do that, you need to basically put together a compelling vision for what this product could do, and how it could help users, and how it could deliver value for the business. And you need to evangelize that vision across all the organizations within the company that you're going to need to get on board to get this thing to actually happen. So you're going to need some engineers involved. You're going to need them to be excited about building this. You're going to need the leadership team, the executives, to believe in the concept and be willing to sponsor it, and so on and so on. And so you have to make that happen. You have to build that groundswell of support. Once you've got that, then you can start doing more detailed research. So this is where you actually go out and you talk to potential customers, potential clients, and really deeply understand, is this a concept that appeals to them? Is this something that they would use? Is it something that they would pay for? Is it sufficiently well differentiated from any current solution they may have that they would accept the switching cost? Is it, in other words, good, not just better, but sufficiently better that they would actually start to use it? And research is something that we do continuously. It's a little bit misleading to suggest that it only happens at this stage. It happens throughout the life cycle. You're always going back and testing new ideas, putting prototypes and designs in front of users and saying, seeing how they respond to that. So what you're looking to get to at this early stage is a set of requirements. What is this product going to do? And critically, what is it not going to do? And one of the hardest things about getting a product off the ground is getting everybody involved to the point where they all have a common understanding of what it is you're going to build. They all understand what you're proposing. Because often, if you come up with an idea, that idea will resonate with a lot of people, but for different reasons, and they'll all have slightly different perceptions of what it is you're proposing to build, because they'll all latch on to some problem that they recognise it might fix. But those problems are not likely to be the same, and you rarely build a good product that tries to be all things to all people. So next you go into the design stage, and when I say design, I don't just mean visual design. That is a part of it. What will it look like? What's the iconography? What's the typography? But I also mean what we call interaction design, which comes first. Interaction design is understanding the flow. What is the sequence of screens and interfaces that you present the user that explains to them what this product does and how to use it? Can you come up with a UI model, essentially, that makes the product intuitive and easy to use? In the old days, products used to come with manuals this thick. That just doesn't happen anymore. But the market won't tolerate that. So the product has to be self-explanatory, it has to be easy, and it has to be intuitive. And what you're looking to get to here is a prototype. So rather than just design it and build it, what you do is you prototype it, and there are a wide variety of tools now available for prototyping that allow you to design user experiences in a sort of smoke and mirrors fashion, where it's just a bunch of static images that are sort of linked together. And then you can do that research I mentioned. You can go and take those prototypes and put them in front of users and just step back and see what happens. Do they know what this thing does? Do they understand how to move through it? And by rapidly iterating on that design and prototyping process, you can converge on a good design without the cost, expense, and risk of actually building it first. And that's, again, a common mistake is just to get stuck straight in to coding. And it's a very, very expensive way to discover that you've built the wrong thing. But if you can get to a good prototype, then you can actually develop it, and that's where you get your development team on board, and they start building the thing that's been prototyped. They've got a prototype, they know what it should look like, they've got a point of reference, and they can develop this product. And once as that is going on, as the development continues, you have to start launch planning, which is the last stage. How are you going to actually get this thing out? How are you going to get it taken to market? This is when you have to start thinking about marketing. It's when you have to start thinking about compliance and regulatory issues. It's when you have to start thinking about, is your support team ready to support it? Is your sales team ready to sell it? And there's a whole set of tasks that have to happen in order for the whole business to be ready to release this product out into the world. And your job as the product manager is to coordinate all that stuff. You're not a marketeer, you don't have to necessarily do the marketing, but you have to make sure it happens. And you have to make sure that the marketing team have a good understanding of what this product is and what it's trying to achieve, make sure that the messaging that they're using is consistent with those goals. And so you have a lot of interesting conversations with a lot of interesting people in this process. Of course, once what you're aiming to get to a point where the product is launched but it's also adopted, where you have a message that resonates with people, and they choose to use the product and generate that value that you were looking for when you started the project off. So one question that I'm often asked is, well, what's the difference between a product manager then and a project manager? And the answer is simply that project management, which is an important discipline and a skill set of product managers, is the art of shipping a product on time and on budget. So it's very much focused on that develop stage. It's the coordination involved in ensuring that projects get delivered according to the timelines that have been laid out. So you'll have a project plan, you'll have certain milestones, and you have to make sure that the project moves through those milestones, and that if there are roadblocks or hurdles or problems, that those get cleared. But the project managers generally don't have that bigger sense of ownership over the strategy, over the vision, over the business side of the equation as well, and design. So a product manager is a sort of significantly larger superset of the sort of core project management role. Now, of course, once you've actually launched, it's not over, because there's the maintenance piece, and there's also additional work around continually refining and optimizing the product and improving it. And in the meantime, as you're doing all that work, you're also going back round and saying, okay, well, assuming this product is a success and this is something you want to keep investing in, what should V2 look like? Where do we take it from here? And at this point, of course, you have access to feedback, real feedback from real users using a real product to start to guide your judgment. One thing always worth stressing, because again, it can be a point of confusion, is that product managers manage products. They don't manage people. In other words, you work with an enormous range of people and you have organizational authority over none of them. So essentially, you have to build strong cases. It's a role of influence, not authority. You have to persuade people that they should do the things you need them to do for this product to succeed. And of course, it's not a one-way conversation, it's a two-way conversation. They, at the same time, are persuading you whether you're doing the right thing, whether you're going about it the right way, whether there are concerns that you haven't considered that need to be factored into the plan. Okay, so before we get into the case study, I just wanted to play this video, which is just a little clip of an interview I did with a guy called Marty Kagan, who is highly respected in the product management space. He was one of the early product managers at Netscape, who was sort of the original web browser company. He then went on to be a director of product management at eBay, and now he runs something called the Silicon Valley Product Group, which is an organization based in the States that essentially does consulting and training for product managers. And I had the pleasure of meeting him last year, and I sat him down and I stuck a camera in his face and I asked him a few questions. There's a full kind of 5-minute interview which you can watch online. But at one point I just said to him, why do you think this is an interesting role?
It's an amazing job, and I think there's a very strong argument to say it is the most important non-executive position in a company. It's really second only to the CEO. And that is, you can say that about a lot of jobs, and a lot of people have found that this is not only a great job and a great career, but it's a proving ground for eventually starting their own company. In fact, a lot of the best investors out there will only invest in someone who has proven they can be a product manager successfully.
Now, you may fairly say, well, he would say that. But actually, this holds out. It turns out that if you look at many of the CEOs of the large technology companies, including the current CEO of Google, including the current CEO of Yahoo, including the CEO of Instagram, they all came from product management backgrounds. They all were originally product managers before they were CEOs. And you also see a strong trend in the large technology companies of product managers going on to found their own companies, because the skill set of a product manager has a lot of overlap with the skill set of a CEO or of an entrepreneur. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll do a case study. I'll just talk through an experience I had of launching a product that I feel is quite interesting, and hopefully one that you enjoy. So, in my time in Australia at Google was mostly spent working on Google Maps, but not just the core Maps product. Actually, what they call their Maps developer platform. So you've probably seen Google Maps crop up in all sorts of places, not just on Google websites. And the technology that allows third-party websites like hotels.com, or TripAdvisor, or Rightmove, or someone like that, to take a Google map, put it on their own website, and then put their own information on top is called the Google Maps API. And it's sort of one of the oldest and most established sort of online software development platforms there are. And for about 3.5 years, I was the product manager for the Google Maps API. And my job was to figure out how to get more developers to adopt this technology and use it. So, just a little bit of background before we get into this particular this particular project. So the Google Maps API shares a lot of technology, unsurprisingly, with Google Maps. And one of the things it shares is the map itself. And the map is delivered as a series of small map images called tiles, about 256 pixels square. And essentially, if you zoom out as far as you can go, the whole world fits on a single tile and looks like that. If you then zoom in once, the size of the map doubles, and the whole world fits on 4 tiles, and so on, and so on. And when I was working on the product, there were about 17 or 18 zoom levels, which if you do the maths works out at about 22 billion tiles, something like that. Although there is a whole load of optimization that's done to not waste time drawing like the middle of the ocean or the middle of deserts where there's nothing to see. Okay, so how does this work? How were map tiles actually generated? So at this time, there was this enormous, highly optimized, custom-built database that stored all the raw map data. Google would go out and license and collect information from all sorts of companies and organizations and governments around the world that told them where the roads are and what buildings are there, where the parks are and so on. These would all be modeled in this database. And then every few weeks, a process would run over that data set and spit out 4 or 5 billion map tiles. That process took a long time, as you can imagine. Even on Google scale infrastructure, it still took many, many hours. And then those tiles would get replicated out across all the data centers that serve Google Maps. And when you opened your web browser and requested a particular page, just the set that you needed to fill the space on your browser would be loaded. Sounds good, but it became clear over time that there were circumstances in which Google needed to show different maps to different people. One was what we call disputed borders. So there are borders around the world which the countries on either side of don't necessarily agree on where those borders lie. And these are enormously sensitive geopolitical issues. If you want to operate a mapping service online in India, you have to draw the map as the Indian government would have you draw it. So this is the border, for example, between the north of India and China. And this is what it looks like in India, this is what it looks like in China. India, China, India, China. If you're outside of those countries, it looks like this, which is sort of the somewhere around here treatment. So there's, and obviously that distinction applies right down through the zoom levels, and they have to maintain that. And these disputed borders are not uncommon. If you look on Wikipedia, there are whole articles with just massive lists of disputed borders. Another reason why you might want to draw a different map is internationalization. If you are Chinese and you are in China, you need to be able to read the map in Chinese. But if you're a foreign tourist visiting, you need to be able to read it in English. And of course, these localization issues apply with all the different permutations of countries and city names and languages. So what it meant was that rather than rendering one map, Google was now rendering a whole stack of different maps. And this problem was getting worse and worse. It was continuing to proliferate. So around 2007, a team at Google in Seattle proposed something which at the time seemed like utter madness. It was pretty radical. They believed that they could write a system where instead of rendering all these maps once and then distributing out to data centers, it would switch to sending a lightweight copy of the raw map data out to the data centers, and then rendering every map image in real time at the second that anybody requested. So when you go and request a Google map, the map that you're seeing, the images you're seeing, were built for you at that very second. So that would obviously solve a whole load of problems, because then you can encode into that request what country you're in, what language you need, and various other parameters, and start personalizing the map to your needs. So this was interesting and useful, and something that we in the API team could inherit. But my job as a product manager was to say, what else does this technology facilitate? What else does it enable? What could we do that would be of interest to our developers that was not possible before this was done? So one of the challenges we had and what we would hear is that the way in which people use the Maps API is quite dissimilar from the way in which people use Google Maps. Google Maps is all about navigation and discovery. The Google Maps API is a lot about data visualization. And the thing about data visualization is that the map essentially is just the location context for your data. And any additional detail on the map that isn't relevant to your data is just clutter. It just gets in the way. And so what we were seeing was a lot of demand for things like this, where the map is it's desaturated and it's simplified, and it's just made minimal for you to put interesting data like a heat map on top of it. We're also seeing demand for customization of the map so that it matched the house style. There was this thing that people had started writing articles about Google Maps fatigue, which is this notion that Google Maps have become so ubiquitous across the internet, and they all look the same, and they'd sort of taken the creativity out of mapping data. This is sort of an extreme example. This is an organization that helps you find the resources you need in a zombie apocalypse. And so they have styled their map to be kind of red and black. But this is the sort of things that we were hearing people wanted to do. And suddenly that became possible. Up to this point, the idea of restyling the map itself was just out of the question because the maps were all pre-computed. Now they were being rendered in real time, it became a real possibility. So we pitched this, we got support for it. The engineers in Seattle who built the infrastructure were really excited because it was a chance to really show off the work they'd done. Like changing the language of labels is all very well and good, but this was cool shit. So it wasn't too hard to get their support and build a case to take to the leadership team for Maps on Earth. But there were some constraints that we needed to be aware of and we needed to operate within. The first is that it was an absolute rule that every request could not take more than 10 milliseconds. So rendering a single map tile could not take more than 10 milliseconds. These were the kind of performance laws, if you like, of Google infrastructure. So we couldn't do anything that would slow down the rendering process. There were also rules that said we could not, one of the consequences of that is we could not increase the size of the data set that was transferred outwards to the data centers. So I mentioned that we take a stripped down version of the geographical data and we move it to the data centers. And the reason it's stripped down is to meet that 10 millisecond performance limit. And so it's stripped down such that only information that must be there to render the maps that need to be shown is included. Now, that might seem like a strange thing to say, but one of the consequences, for example, is we couldn't let people change the typeface. So the typeface used for all the labels was not something we could adapt because that would require a whole new font file to be distributed in that data set. It also meant that we couldn't allow people to draw new things on the map. So, for example, counties. If you look on Google Maps, you'll find that county borders are just not shown and not there at any zoom level. It's a styling decision that was made, and as a result, county information was not passed down to the data centers because it wasn't needed. Another interesting example of this, which caught us out early on, is the only country border information that is stored for rendering Google Maps are the land borders, because you don't need a sea border because you've got the sea. So if you ask Google to draw you a map of the country borders only, it looks like that. Because you've got to have, the water is what does the rest of the job. So this is the sort of simplification they were doing, that we had to work within those constraints. Okay, so now we get this interesting academic exercise of figuring out how do you model the planet, essentially. And we came up with this whole type hierarchy that determined how we allow developers to identify different types of object that they might want to style. And this is actually just a subset of that hierarchy, but it gives you a sense of the way we structured it. And we also had to figure out what the stylers would be. What controls would we give you? Now you might think the obvious thing to do is just to let you choose colors. But actually, if you let someone just go at a map and change the colors of individual things, it will quickly look horrendous. Like, cartography is hard. It's both an art and a science. And we need to make it simple to make changes that would have the effect that people wanted without completely trashing how the map looked. So I actually ended up thinking about who are the people who are going to be doing this work. Well, it tends to be web developers and designers. What are the tools that they use? How do people design? And the tools they use are things like Photoshop or Fireworks or Illustrator, things like that. So I took a copy of a map and I loaded it into Photoshop and I'd ask myself, how would I go about styling this map in Photoshop? And Photoshop has a bunch of adjustment filters that you can apply. So you can say, basically turn the brightness up, turn the saturation up, change the hue to red. And I started messing around with these and discovered this worked pretty well. If you just say to Google, okay, or say to Photoshop, set the hue to red, which basically means you preserve all the brightness and saturation values of the colours, but you change the tone to red across the board, you still end up with a very usable map. It just looks red. And that was exactly what we were going for. So rather than set individual colour controls, we learned from Photoshop and we adopted these kinds of filters and created a set of stylers that adjusted gamma, brightness, saturation, a few other things. And then we had to figure out how to represent that. Remember, this is a developer product, so we need to actually be able to represent it in code. Maps API is a JavaScript API. You might recognize this as a JSON object, but it's still a pretty horrendous looking JSON object. And sometimes you just got to accept that those are the compromises you have to make. One of the challenges we discovered was that ordering is highly significant. If you run stylers in different orders, you get dramatically different outputs. And so we had this crazily nested data structure to try and describe, for example, the map on the right there. And then when it came to launching it, there's a whole world of things I had to worry about and shield the engineers from as they cracked on. So things like sort of the legal side was normally you have to worry about privacy and security. It wasn't too much of a problem in this case because we weren't handling any user data. Capacity is about whether the systems are prepared. Is this launch going to add a lot of new traffic to Google? Could it potentially threaten the stability of other services? Legal issues such as is there any risk to Google if someone creates a map and then takes all the railway lines off it, so nobody can see the railway lines anymore, for example? Are we liable if someone walks onto a railway line because it wasn't on a map that someone showed them? Marketing, we have a conversation with them about how we're going to market this feature, but they also had some concerns about whether we were undermining the brand value of a Google map, because they're highly recognizable things on the internet, and that's a lot of valuable pixel real estate that we were allowing people to mess with. But again, once we showed them some of these restylings, they realized, actually, this still looks very much like a Google map. Some of the things that you can't change, that I mentioned earlier, like typefaces, like the width of roads, things like that, are the things that make it so distinctive. And then pricing is obviously also an interesting conversation. We had discussions about whether this was a feature we should only allow paying customers to use. And in the end decided that actually the chances of it getting the kind of adoption it would need for awareness to grow and people to start wanting to use it would be severely limited if it was paid customers only. So we did decide to offer it to everybody for free. Documentation, obviously, another important thing when you're looking at a developer product. As I say, consumer products are not so common anymore, but for developer products, utterly essential. So we had tech writers who were working on documenting this. My job as the product manager was to review all these documentations, sign off on them, make sure that they were correct. Launch messaging. So this is the blog post I wrote that went on the Google blog that announced the feature. And we also, this was scheduled to go out with a developer conference we were running as well. So we're on a hard, immovable deadline to get all this done in time. Which is why you'll see at the bottom of this blog post is that there's a very simple demo that just does some very simple styling. And I used to make it a matter of principle that I would always write the launch demo for any product that we were launching, because it gave me a chance to empathize with the developer experience and make sure that we launched a good product. And what I realized in writing that demo was that this was too hard. That data structure I told you about earlier was just too complicated for someone to realistically get their head around how to write that structure. And also, it was almost impossible to preview what a map was going to look like just using that data structure. I realized basically that if this thing was going to ever possibly succeed, it had to have some kind of online tool where you could experiment and play, design a map, and then just have that data structure generated for you. The problem was, I realized this less than a week before launch, and there was nobody available to work on this, because they were all flat out trying to get this and a myriad of other things that were launching at the same event done in time. So, one of the things about being a product manager is sometimes you just got to do what's got to be done, because nobody else is going to. So, by this time, I'd arrived in San Francisco for the conference, sorry. So I holed myself up in this hotel for an entire weekend. I think I left once to get a pizza. I sat on my bed, which looked very much like this, and I frantically wrote a map styling wizard, a tool basically to do this. It looked like this. It wasn't pretty. The code was awful. There's a reason that I wasn't an engineer at Google, but it did work. It was sufficient. And I thought at the time, again, as I said, this was May of 2010, I thought, it'll do, once I get back to Sydney, I'll get someone who knows what they're doing to rewrite it. Google replaced this 3 months ago. Yeah, whenever you think I'll get someone to do it later, or even you think I'll do it later, never get around to it. It did go for a few minor revisions to tidy it up, but it did live a lot longer than I expected. So I had this tool, and now I could do something that is something you normally take for granted when you're developing a product, which is I could rigorously test it. I could quickly and easily try every permutation that this product would enable. And it mostly worked. I was going through all the permutations thinking this is good, that works, every styler works, the feature selectors all work. And then I just did a very simple map where I said turn all features, completely desaturate all features, basically turn the map to black and white. It looked fine, and then I zoomed in, and I saw this. And I'm like, what? What are those? A tiny little thing, but highly significant, because it turns out that the way the system works is there's all this vector data, and there's a system that renders the map from that vector data. But these interstate freeway shields, which are very iconic in America, they are just tiny little images that are placed on at the very end. And nobody had written any code to restyle images. They'd only written code to restyle vectors. So this was seemingly a small thing, but actually from an architectural and implementation point, a really significant challenge, because you're talking about completely rebuilding the styling system, but to work on sprites rather than on vectors. And I figured this out on Sunday night, and it launched on Tuesday morning. Actually, no, that's not true. Wednesday morning it launched. So, again, this is another good example of the sort of thing you have to do when you're a product manager, is I got on the phone to the director of engineering in Seattle who managed the team that owns the back-end infrastructure that was delivering this styling. And I said to him, we got a problem. It looks like the stylers don't work on road shields. And he was like, oh yeah, I can see why that would be. It's because yada yada yada. I said, okay, can you get someone to fix it? And he was like, no. No, we're all very busy. We don't really have the time. We're all preparing for a huge list of launches also happening on Tuesday or Wednesday. I said, look, okay, I totally understand where you're coming from, but have a play with this tool, reproduce the bug, and tell me what you think. Tell me whether this is something that you feel comfortable releasing. So he goes away and he does exactly that, and I get a message on Monday morning, and it just says, I agree this is bad. Leave it with me. I'll see what I can do. So I'm sort of just drumming my fingers and hoping this is going to be fine. And the following day, I get up, not knowing whether we're going to have a product that's okay or not, and I've got another message, and it just says, couldn't find anybody, so stayed up late and did it myself. And this is a director. This is not someone who does much coding anymore, right? But in the end, he just decided that he would figure it out. And one of the reasons that was possible was because this was someone I knew, someone I'd worked with before, someone I had a good relationship with. He knew when I got in touch with him that I wasn't just causing trouble, that I wasn't casting dispersions on his team. I was just asking for help. I'm eternally grateful to him for doing that. So that was that. We got it launched. This was a kind of there's a whole video online where we sort of announced it to the world. And as with all things, it was kind of slow build. We didn't see it used that much at first, but in the time since then, it's become more and more common. And of course, the thing is, having worked on that product, I recognise it instantly whenever I see it. It's something I'm very proud of. It was one of perhaps 40 different launches I worked on when I was on that team over those three and a half years. But even now, when I see a style map on a website, I look at it and think, I made that happen. Right? I didn't write it, but that would not be like that if it wasn't for me. That's true of product management in general. You get very attached to your products; they're like your children. And which is why I was so crazily delighted in a kind of nerdy way when, as part of preparing for this presentation, I went hunting on the website of the San Francisco Intercontinental Hotel for a photo and discovered that they're using style maps. So I was just like, it's all come full circle. They don't realise that the last few stress-filled days of this product played out in one of their hotel rooms. But this is the map that makes me happiest of all. This is the map that makes the whole thing worthwhile. This is Yara Maps, which basically takes Google Maps and just turns it into Pirate Maps. It's brilliant. You can just try it for yourself. The fact that the zoom control has been turned into a telescope is just a piece of a work of genius. Okay, so that's just one story, and product management is just filled with stories like that. It's highly fulfilling in that sense. But there are lots of other good reasons to do it. So it's another video clip. There's a reason I've got these clips, which is that as part of this project, I've been sitting down with successful product managers and just asking them a few questions about how they got into the role and why they enjoy it, and what advice they give for someone who is thinking of doing it. This is a guy who works at a London company called Dudil, who do essentially they help they collect information about businesses, so and then allow people to kind of use that data for their own needs. And we had a chat at their office. This is their social space that's meant to look like a library, which is why it's all kind of dark and moody. But I asked him, why do you enjoy this role?
So it's really seeing, if you want to kind of summarize it in one action or whatever, it's seeing the smile on people's faces when you've solved their problem. There's nothing better than seeing that happen. I think there's a lot of work that goes into building something, but during that journey you learn so much about the problem you're solving, who you're solving it for, and working with a team is one of the best things you can do. It is working towards a common goal, but not necessarily it being predefined. It's not in a sort of agency model. No, someone doesn't say, I want an e-commerce website built. It's, hey, here's a problem, how can we fix it? And in that regard, it's quite a creative role as well as one where you have to hunker down as much as you can. Yeah.
Okay, so you've probably already figured out by now that you end up working with an enormous variety of different people and different roles, and you become not an expert in any of these things, but you learn a little bit about all these topics, and you also learn how to communicate with people who do that role and how to translate between functions. You're kind of the universal translator, so that when your lawyer tells you that for regulatory reasons we need to make the following changes to the product, you can take that and you can go back to the engineering team, you can translate that into the changes they need to make. And if there are technical reasons why those changes are difficult, you can talk to them about potential alternatives or compromises, go back to the legal team and have that conversation. So this is one of the reasons why it's such a good role if you've kind of got entrepreneurial ambitions, because you pick up a little bit of all these skills. It's just, I've gone too fast. Come back. Let me get back. So I thought it'd be useful just to put together a list of the sort of companies that hire product managers in the UK, just to prove that I'm not just making this up. And I literally went onto one of the main job search websites, stuck product manager in, this was a few weeks ago, and then just went through the list picking out the names of companies I recognised, found their logo online, stuck it on this slide. Obviously not exhaustive, but it just gives you a sense of the variety from kind of startups all the way up to kind of big multinational technology companies. One thing I did want to point out, Microsoft is a little bit of an unusual case because the role that I'm describing, what's conventionally known as a product manager, at Microsoft is called a program manager. And the reason it's worth knowing that is because they do have a role called product manager, but it's a marketing role. So just be aware of that distinction. It's just a result of the fact that they were doing this before anybody else, and the terminology hadn't really settled down. Okay, so I sort of alluded to this already, but one of the other great things about product management is it just has a lot of, it offers you a lot of opportunities to go on to other things. So you can move between startups and large companies, and product management in those two environments is quite different. But not in neither is better than the other, they're just different experiences. A lot of people go on to found their own companies. But also it's a very transferable skill. So it's not a coincidence that I was able to easily move from the UK to Sydney to the US and then back. Anywhere where there's sort of a technology hub, if you like, you'll find a demand for product managers. Okay. So we already talked about this. We talked about existing successful product managers. And now I just thought worth mentioning that it's also fairly well paid. You tend to find that product management now has established itself as a role that sits alongside software engineering. They tend to be in similar parts of the organisation, and the compensation for product managers tends to roughly track with that of a software engineer in most companies. This data is a little bit out of date. It's adjusted for inflation, but it's broadly in line with my expectations, certainly as a hiring manager or someone who might be going out looking for roles. Okay. So, in summary, you've got a lot of responsibility and a lot of autonomy, which is great. You're doing something meaningful. You get exposed to an awful lot of interesting people and a lot of interesting functions. You get a sense of the big picture of what's going on inside companies. A lot of long-term options, and you feel useful and well compensated. Okay, so hopefully I've either persuaded you this is interesting, or persuaded you this is something you want nothing to do with ever. The latter is absolutely fine, although it's worth mentioning that if you're, for example, doing software development, you'll probably come across product managers at some point in your career, and it's worth you knowing what you're up against. But if it is something you want to do, how would you get started, or what should you be doing now? So there's plenty you can be doing now to sort of lay the groundwork for moving into this role. So there are a variety of product management events that happen all over the country. Product Tank is the most well known. It's a kind of global network of product management events that happen. I say that, I have to confess I don't think there's one in Exeter. But there's definitely one in London, there's definitely one in Bristol, there's definitely some in North England as well. But there are also, if you just look on meetup.com, there are also lots of other smaller events going on. It's a good opportunity just to meet people in person and get a sense of the role from them. This is a bit lazy, but basically Medium is full of articles about product management, from the very kind of what is a product manager all the way through to really, really arcane details of the role. And there are also an awful lot of books relevant to product managers. What I would strongly recommend actually is you just do a search on Google, for your search engine of choice, for product management reading lists, and you'll find there are a couple of people who've published really good reading lists. And what's interesting about those reading lists is it's not just sort of academic books on product management. It's actually normally a very wide variety of books about leadership, about marketing, about design, about strategy. So we actually have a book club in Crowdcube now for product and design. So every month we read a different book, and there's a really interesting variety. There's plenty of communities on Slack as well, and I will point you to a page later which actually summarises all this that you can look up. Basically, Product Manager HQ is the big global community. Mind the Product is an organisation based in the UK that organises conferences and these Product Tank events, and they have a Slack channel as well. And then there's also a separate Women in Product channel that was set up by the VP of Product at Slack. Okay. And finally, the one piece of advice that I always give people is build something. I know I've said it's not you're not a developer, but it's hugely beneficial if you're doing product management to be able to empathise with the developer experience. So even if you just try and build something hugely basic, if you just try and build a simple app for your phone or put together a website using WordPress, when I'm hiring or recruiting, I always look for some indication that it's someone who has an interest in technology and is willing to get their hands dirty. If you're looking, when you get to the stage where you're actually looking for roles, there's sort of two tacks you can take. There's the large company tack, and there's the startup route. For large companies, many of them have very well established graduate recruitment and training schemes for product managers. Google's is the most famous. It's called the APM program. If you just search for that, you'll find all sorts of interesting articles about the history of that program and what they get up to. That program has been pretty much replicated almost exactly by a number of other companies. Yahoo most notably, because the APM program was originally started by Marissa Mayer, who, when she was at Google, and she's now the CEO of Yahoo. So she literally just took it lock, stock and barrel with her. The Facebook have what's called the rotational product management program, which is very similar. One of the things that these programs all have in common is that you rotate through a number of different teams over the course of a couple of years and get a taste for product management on different types of products. You also have the freedom to move around the world. So I work with a lot of APMs in Sydney who've chosen to spend one of their 2 years in Australia, for example. And then if you're interested more in smaller companies, then these are just a few places to look for jobs, product management jobs at startups. Mind Product have a jobs board of their own that's just beginning to grow, becoming quite popular. AngelList is always a good place for technology jobs in general. And as a recruiter, I can tell you that AngelList generally delivers much higher quality candidates than LinkedIn, for example. LinkedIn has a very high signal to noise ratio, so you tend to get a lot of people who are not necessarily qualified because it just has such broad reach. Working Startups is a great site for just startup jobs. It looks like it was built in the late 90s, but it has a lot of good jobs on it. And lastly, I used to have a whole section in here about the interview process, but I came to the conclusion that that was a bit premature and that the case study would perhaps be a better use of time. But if you are interested in how you can effectively interview for a product management role, this is the book on doing that. It covers all the different types of interviews, how different companies interview for product managers, and how to go about those different interview types. There's also a great website you can use to practice if you want to pretend to be in an interview, called the PM Interview. It's written by someone who was preparing for an interview, and so he just compiled a list of questions and had this website fire them at him with a timer. And since then, people have ploughed in and suggested other questions you might want to add to it. Lastly, this is the website that accompanies this presentation. It's got all the supporting material on it. There's a resources page that has links to all the stuff I've just talked about. All the videos from all the times I've delivered it are on there. This one will be on there in a week or two. And those, what I call product manager stories, those 5-minute interviews I've been doing, are all on there as well. So check that out. And that's me.